Most people think Halloween is just a fun night. Costumes, laughter, and candy. But some people choose that night because they know darkness is the best place to hide. This incident happened 2 years ago, on Halloween of 2023. I am a 25-year-old man, but at the time of this story, I was 22. That day, because of a festival we had, I went through a very long workday. We had a celebration where parents brought their kids to the center to participate in different activities, such as various competitive games, a costume contest, a trivia contest to win candy, and a dodgeball game between the kids and the parents. Overall, it was a really good time, but it was definitely exhausting as well. For more context, I am a social worker, so hosting social events is basically part of my daily job. But even so, it takes a lot of energy, if you know what I mean. Anyway, after the event ended, I went home and was ready to call it a night. About an hour after I got home, around a little after 6, my younger sister called me. My sister, whom I'll call Savannah, asked me to take her and my nephew, whom I'll call Jackson, out for Halloween because neither our parents nor Jackson's parents felt like doing it. And as always, the responsibility fell on me to play the role of the cool older brother and do it. Savannah was 15 years old and Jackson was 11. Even though I really didn't feel like it at all, I got up, got dressed, and headed to my parents' house to pick them up. When I got there, I asked if they were ready, but Savannah was still finishing her costume. She was dressed as Raven from Teen Titans. She had even put on white makeup to get that ghostly look Raven usually has. Jackson was dressed as Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat. Once Savannah was ready, we got in the car and left and I took them to a fairly busy neighborhood to make sure they got as much candy as possible. When we arrived, we started going from house to house. Everyone we encountered was friendly and gave out plenty of treats. There was even one house where an elderly man gave each of them a hot dog and a soda. He said that every year on Halloween he doesn't give out candy, but instead grills food, because he prefers to give kids something with protein since it's good for the body. Honestly, we probably need more people like him. We passed by a lot of kids, and some of them complimented Savannah's and Jackson's costumes. I also saw some really cool costumes myself. It seemed like everyone in that area had really gone all out for Halloween. When we reached the last house of the night, we started heading back toward the car. It was about a 10-minute walk, since we had gone all the way to the end of the neighborhood. The neighborhood was quieter now, and there weren't many people outside. Because of that, I got worried when I looked across the street and saw someone standing in a yard with their porch light off, dressed entirely in black. I'm surprised I even noticed them, but I usually pay attention to my surroundings. When I looked more closely, the person appeared to be wearing a cloak, dressed completely in black, and wearing a mask, because I couldn't see their face at all. I genuinely couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. Whoever it was, they seemed to be watching us. I told Savannah and Jackson to stay close to me and said, "There's a suspicious person over there in that yard. Look, but don't stare." I said this so they could see who I was talking about without encouraging the person to approach us or follow us. Jackson laughed and thought it was just someone trying to scare passers-by. but Savannah clearly looked worried. Now, just to add a bit of context, I had a backpack with me that contained a Glock, and Savannah knew this. So when I told them to stay close to me, she probably understood that I was being serious. Jackson didn't know anything. He's far too young for me to tell him I carry a real firearm. As we moved farther away, it seemed like the person was still watching us, although it was hard to tell in the dark. We were getting close to the car when suddenly I heard heavy footsteps behind us, like boots hitting the asphalt. I turned around and saw the same person again, the same all-black outfit, but this time I could see more clearly. They were wearing a tactical vest, tactical boots, and black pants tucked into the boots. They also had on a full spandex mask that covered their entire face. This made the situation much more serious. When you see someone dressed like that, the first thing that comes to mind is that they're armed. I thought to myself, they're following us. I quietly told Savannah and Jackson, you both need to listen very carefully. Don't stop and don't turn around. The person I told you about earlier is following us. They're right behind us now. The last thing we want is to make them nervous or provoke them. So stay calm and just keep walking. I said this mostly for Jackson's sake, since he was younger and might not fully understand how serious the situation was. Savannah completely understood. We kept walking and occasionally glanced behind us. The person kept the same distance, but was still following us. When we reached the car, they were still coming toward us. That's when I decided to make a bold move. I pulled out the Glock and aimed it at them. I asked why they were following us. They raised their hands, as if they hadn't expected it at all, and then slowly removed their mask. It was a woman, and she appeared to be in her mid-30s. She took off her mask, but didn't answer my question. She just stared at me. I asked again, still aiming the gun at her, "Why are you following us?" What she said next made no sense. In an almost robotic tone, she said, "I am an undercover police officer. I was told there had been a burglary, so I came to investigate. That's why I was standing outside that house. But when you gave me a suspicious look, I thought you were the one responsible. So it would be wise for you to put that gun down. Otherwise, I can arrest you for threatening a law enforcement officer." I hesitated, but then lowered the gun. What else could I do? I didn't want to risk getting arrested or ruin the kid's night. But her story made no sense. She claimed she had received a burglary report. So why was she just standing outside the house and not even facing it? How did me looking at her make her think I was responsible? Why would someone burglarize a house and then casually walk around the neighborhood afterward? And why was she wearing a cloak? All of these questions were running through my head. So I asked her, "If you're undercover, why are you wearing tactical gear? That makes it obvious you're an officer. And what's with the cloak?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me again, but this time her expression had changed. There was something malicious in her eyes, as if she was angry that I didn't believe her and was deciding what to do next. Jackson and Savannah had stayed completely silent the entire time. Then she gave a strange, terrifying smile and said, "If you didn't have that gun, this night would have ended very differently for you." At that exact moment, I noticed 4 other people suddenly emerge from between the houses and start walking toward us. All of them were wearing tactical gear, but none of them had cloaks. That I immediately told Savannah and Jackson to get into the car, while keeping my eyes on the woman and the others. Once I saw they were inside, I got in myself and drove away. As I pulled off, the woman was still standing there, smiling. The others, 3 men and 1 woman, weren't smiling. Their faces were blank and emotionless, like they didn't have souls. It's hard to explain. The entire drive back was silent. I'm sure the kids were just as shaken as I was. I dropped them off, made sure they got inside safely, and then went home to process what had happened. What I couldn't get out of my head was why we had been targeted. The neighborhood was full of people walking around. So why us? I wish I could say it ended there, but it didn't. A few days later, I received a message from an unknown number. It was just a photo with no text. The photo was of my car, taken in the parking lot of my apartment complex. I called the police and told them everything that had happened on Halloween night. They filed a report, but said that unless there was a direct threat, they couldn't investigate. The usual procedure. Out of curiosity and maybe stupidity, I went back to the same house where I had first seen the woman. I knocked on the door, and a man in his 40s answered. I asked if there had been a burglary at their house on Halloween night. He looked confused and said no. He said he had gone to bed early because he had to work in the morning and hadn't noticed anything strange. I explained what I had seen, but he had no idea what I was talking about. I thanked him and left. At that point, I was certain the undercover officer's story was a lie, but I wanted to do a bit of my own investigating to figure out what had happened. Whoever that woman and those people were, they somehow knew my phone number and where I lived. That makes me wonder, was that encounter really random? Had they been watching me for some time? Did they have a plan that night? And did the fact that I was armed ruin it? All of these thoughts messed with my head for a long time and made me feel paranoid for quite a while. I had to go to therapy and install a Ring camera on my front door to feel safe again. If you're wondering, no, I haven't received any more unknown messages since then. After that photo, nothing else happened. 2 years later, I still think about that night. Writing this story helps me a lot, and I'm trying to fully move on from it. But if there's one thing I want people to take away from this story, it's this. Always pay attention to your surroundings. You never know who might be watching you. You can very easily end up in a dangerous situation just for existing. So always stay aware and protected, because I can say with complete confidence that being armed that night probably saved our lives. Second story. This happened when I was 12 years old. That day was Halloween, and my family was staying at a small family resort about an hour away from where we lived. My parents wanted to do something different that year instead of just trick-or-treating in our own neighborhood. The resort was hosting a Halloween weekend event with lots of activities, games, and even a spooky hayride that wasn't a very large place. It had maybe around 10 cabins, one main building, a small lake, and a long open field where the hayride and games were set up. It was surrounded by forest on all sides. During the day, it looked normal and even peaceful. But once it got dark, the woods looked pitch black and intimidating, and the resort became unnervingly quiet. We arrived earlier in the afternoon. I remember feeling excited when we walked into the cabin because the smell of fire smoke and caramel apples filled the air. Kids were running around in Halloween costumes even before it got dark. My parents said the hayride would start around 7 p.m., and there would be games before that, so I went off to play while they unpacked. There were booths where you could toss rings onto bottles to win candy, a costume contest, and even a pumpkin carving area. Everything was decorated with orange lights and fake spider webs. That's where I met another kid my age. His name was Ryan. He was dressed as a skeleton and said he and his parents were staying in the cabin next to ours. We played a few games together and collected a decent amount of candy. As it got closer to 7, we saw families heading toward the hayride area. The tractor pulling the wagon was parked next to a large barn, and inside the wagon were hay bales set up for seating. About 20 people climbed on. The driver wore a scarecrow mask, and employees dressed as zombies jumped out along the route to scare people. At first, the hayride was fun. It was dark out, and torches lit up the dirt path. The tractor moved slowly through the woods, and every so often someone in costume would jump out from behind a tree or run toward the wagon. Most people screamed and then laughed. Everything felt like a normal Halloween attraction. But about halfway through the ride, something made me feel uneasy. In a part of the trail that was darker than the rest, the tractor slowed down. I looked toward the edge of the woods on my side. That's when I saw him. A man was standing just outside the torchlight. He was not part of the hayride crew. I knew that immediately. His clothes didn't match the theme at all. From what I remember, he was wearing a black jacket, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He was just standing there, not moving. His hands were in his pockets. At first, I thought maybe he was an employee taking a break, but he wasn't doing anything. He was just watching. At one point, I think I made eye contact with him, or at least it felt that way. Even though his face was in shadow, I could feel his gaze locked onto me. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed, but no one seemed to. When I looked back, he was still standing in the exact same position for the rest of the ride. I tried to ignore him, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. When the hayride ended and everyone got off, I looked back toward the woods one more time. He was gone. I didn't tell anyone right away. I figured maybe I was imagining things or overreacting. We went back to the main building, where there were games and food. My parents were sitting near the fire, and Ryan and I went around collecting more candy. Everything felt normal again. About an hour later, I saw him again. Ryan and I were standing near the snack table when I noticed someone standing a little distance away from the crowd. It was the same man. He wasn't very close, maybe about 30 feet away, but he was standing near the tree line, watching again. Even though there were lots of people around, it was strange that he was standing alone. When I realized he was looking at me, my stomach tightened. I tried to get a better look at his face, but the lighting was poor. He had short facial hair, and I think there was a logo on his hat. I nudged Ryan and pointed him out. Ryan looked and said, "Maybe he's one of the workers." I said, "No, he's not. He was out in the woods during the hayride." Ryan shrugged and said, "Maybe he's someone's dad." I wanted to believe that, but he wasn't talking to anyone. He was just standing there. A few minutes later, when I looked again, he was gone. Around 9 p.m., if I had to guess, most of the younger kids had gone back to their cabins. The event was winding down, but Ryan and I still had energy. We decided to take a short walk around the resort before heading back. Behind the cabins, There was a path that led into the woods. Ryan said it would be fun to walk a little way in to do something spooky for the end of Halloween night. That I didn't want to go too far, but we had flashlights and I didn't want to seem scared. So we went down the dirt path together, laughing and daring each other to keep going. The farther we walked, the quieter everything became. The sounds of the resort slowly faded until all we could hear was gravel crunching under our shoes. We went maybe about 200 feet in and stopped near a small clearing. There was an old wooden sign nailed to a tree that read "Private Property." We started throwing small rocks at the sign and pretending we were summoning spirits or doing something else stupid. That's when we both heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps. Behind us, deeper down the path that we froze and turned around. Ryan quietly said, "It's probably just another kid." But it didn't sound like a kid. Whoever was walking had weight. It sounded like an adult that I shined my flashlight down the path. The beam didn't go very far, and I still couldn't see anyone. Then the footsteps stopped. There were a few seconds of complete silence. Then a voice spoke. "Hey kids." It was a man's voice, calm, but deeply unsettling. Ryan looked at me, and I think he realized the same thing I did. That it was the same man from the hayride. He stepped forward just enough for part of his body to enter the light. The same black jacket, the same hat. He asked, "What are you doing out here? You like candy?" Neither of us said anything. He pulled something out of his pocket and held it up. I saw the orange wrapper. "A Reese's candy," he said. "I've got lots of these back at my cabin. Come on, I'll give you some." Ryan took a step back. I remember his face going pale. The man took a few steps closer and said, "You don't need to be scared. It's Halloween. I'm just handing out candy. I saw you earlier on the hayride." When he said that, my stomach dropped. I grabbed Ryan's arm and whispered, "Run." We both turned and sprinted back toward the resort. For a few moments, I could hear him behind us. His footsteps hit the ground hard as he started chasing us. I didn't dare look back. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. When we reached the edge of the woods, I saw the lights of the resort. I yelled for help. We burst out of the trees and ran straight toward the crowd by the fire. Several adults turned toward us in surprise. We didn't stop until we were fully surrounded by people. That I turned around to see if the man was behind us. He wasn't. The path was empty. My parents rushed over immediately and asked what had happened. I told them everything. The man watching during the hayride, standing by the trees, and then following us into the woods. Ryan backed up everything I said. My dad and another man grabbed flashlights and went to check the trail, but they didn't find anyone. Some of the resort staff searched as well, but the man had vanished. The resort contacted the local police. About 30 minutes later, officers arrived and took statements from me, Ryan, and our parents. They said they would search the area and notify nearby cabins to stay alert. That night, my parents didn't let me out of their sight. We stayed inside the cabin and locked the door. I couldn't sleep for hours. Every sound outside made me jump. The next morning, the police returned and said they had searched the entire property, but couldn't find anyone matching the description. No suspicious vehicles had been reported, and no one with that description was registered at the resort. They believed it may have been a trespasser from outside the property that we left later that afternoon. I remember looking out the car window at the woods, half expecting to see him standing there again. For weeks afterward, I thought I saw him along the road, outside stores, and even once in my school parking lot. But it was always someone else, or at least I hope it was. Ryan and I stayed in touch for a while. He said he couldn't sleep for days after it happened. Nothing ever came of it. The police never followed up. The man was never identified or caught. Now that I'm older, when I think back on that night, what scares me most isn't what he did, it's what he could have done. If we had believed him for even a second, if we had walked toward him, I don't think I'd be alive to tell this story. And ever since that night, every Halloween, when I see someone standing alone on the edge of a crowd, I always think of that man. Sometimes, the people who seem like they're part of the fun are watching for a very different reason. Third story. My name is Roger, and this happened to me 3 years ago on Halloween night. I'm 29 years old, and I work a boring office job, but the pay is good. When this happened, I was still new, and I always got the bad shifts, very little time off, and the jobs no one else wanted. Because of that, when Halloween, my favorite holiday, came around, I was genuinely excited. Being new at work isn't easy, so I wanted to spend the night watching kids have fun and then relax at home with a movie. At the time, I lived alone in a small house on the edge of town with my girlfriend, but she was out of town visiting her family. The house wasn't completely isolated. I had neighbors, but the street got very quiet after Halloween ended. Families usually turned their lights off around 9 p.m. Since I didn't have kids, I only handed out candy until the crowds thinned out. I was already used to prank doorbell ringing from previous Halloweens. That year, Halloween fell on a Saturday, and the weather was cold but clear. Around 10:30 p.m., I was lying on the couch half watching a horror movie and eating from the bowl of leftover candy. No one had come by for about an hour. When I heard a light knock on the side door of the house, I assumed it was a few late trick-or-treaters. But when I opened the door, no one was there, just the empty driveway and the sound of leaves rustling. I brushed it off. Kids mess around on Halloween. I went back inside to continue watching The Conjuring. 15 minutes later, I heard the same sound again. This time it was coming from the back door, the door that led to a small porch. That's when I got worried, because no one ever used that door. I froze in the living room and listened. The TV was off, and I could clearly hear the metal handle of the back door slowly and carefully being tested. Whoever was trying the door was either gently checking if it was locked or thought it was unlocked and didn't want to make noise. I quietly moved to the kitchen, and that's when I saw him through the window. A man was crouched near the door, wearing dark clothing, with a cheap, cracked Halloween mask pushed back on his head. He was holding a crowbar. He wasn't hiding. He was moving slowly and deliberately, as if he knew I was inside and didn't care. I silently backed away, grabbed my phone, and quietly called 911, telling them what was happening. The operator told me to stay on the line, hide somewhere safe, and not confront him. I didn't want to make noise by running around, so I sat at the top of the stairs, gripping a kitchen knife tightly and whispering updates that I looked down and saw the man step away from the back door. At that moment, I heard the soft sound of a window screen being removed. He had gone to the basement window. I quietly told the operator. He went to the basement. My voice was shaking. She said officers were on the way. Then the worst moment came. I heard the sound of glass cracking. He was breaking the window. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a quick burglary. He knew I was inside the house. And most burglars don't enter a home when they know someone is inside. Minutes felt like hours. The operator kept talking to me to make sure I was okay. I heard footsteps outside on the ground. The man was circling the house again. Then headlights flashed across the curtains. Relief washed over me when red and blue police lights lit up in front of the house. The man ran. I saw him sprint across the yard, but he didn't get far. The police tackled him just past the driveway. It wasn't until one of the officers brought him back in handcuffs that I realized how badly I was shaking. That's when I saw what he had with him: the crowbar, duct tape, and zip ties inside his bag. This wasn't a typical thief looking for valuables. This man had a plan, and that plan was much worse. The police told me he had a long history of breaking and entering and was a suspect in several missing persons cases. To this day, I hate being alone on Halloween night. It's supposed to be a night of scares and fun, but every time I hear footsteps or a knock outside, I'm right back in that moment. The scariest part is that if the police had arrived just 5 minutes later, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. Weeks later, the police followed up and told me what else they found in his backpack: an unloaded .45 caliber handgun, several kitchen knives, and rope. When you put all three of these stories together, a pattern starts to emerge. Halloween isn't just about costumes and candy. It's a night where the line between harmless fun and real danger becomes dangerously thin. Darkness gives people anonymity. Masks remove accountability. And crowded celebrations create the perfect cover for those with bad intentions. That what's truly unsettling isn't the obvious threats. It's how ordinary everything seemed at first. A quiet neighborhood, a family resort, a knock at the door. None of these moments felt dangerous until it was almost too late. In every story, survival came down to awareness, instinct, and timing. Someone noticed something that didn't feel right. Someone listened to that feeling instead of ignoring it.